Number 1.
Fang was last seen at her home on 52nd Avenue in the New York City borough of Queens on July 19, 2002. When her adult daughter, Gina Liang, came home, she found bloodstains on the floor, on the ceiling and on a vase, as well as evidence that someone had tried to clean up. There were no signs of forced entry. Fang was nowhere to be found. She has never been heard from again. Liang believes her stepfather, Roger Wei, was involved in Fang's disappearance. Fang and her husband were in the process of what Liang called an unfriendly divorce, but they were still living together. Fang and Wei lived on the second floor of their residence, and Liang lived on the first floor. In 2008, against Liang's wishes, Wei attempted to have his wife declared legally dead so he could become the administrator of her estate and collect her life insurance policy, which was valued at $1 million. The couple co-owned a house. It was sold after Fang's disappearance, and her share of the profits were held in escrow. Liang has accused the New York Police Department of mishandling the investigation into her mother's disappearance. When she asked to see their records for Fang's case, she was told most of them had been destroyed in a flood. Liang describes her mother as a shy, reclusive woman and stated she could not speak English, although by the time of her disappearance, she had lived in the United States for 18 years. Fang left her wallet and passport behind, and since her disappearance, she hasn't accessed the bank account she shares with her daughter. No one has been charged in Fang's disappearance, but foul play is suspected due to the circumstances involved.
Number 2.
Rita was last seen in the New York City borough of the Bronx on the morning of August 10, 1986. She had worked for the International Paper Company since 1974 and was supposed to attend a business meeting in Chicago, Illinois that day, but she never showed up. She has never been heard from again. Her former husband, Robert C. Fioretti, stated she left after they got into an argument. At the time of her disappearance, Rita was living with her 2 sons in the 400 block of King Avenue in the City Island neighborhood. Robert, a police officer, lived in Queens with his radio patrol partner, who was pregnant with his daughter. Robert stated Rita had left many times before with other men and that she had a drinking problem and psychiatric problems. Others close to Rita disputed this characterization, however, describing her as a responsible employee and devoted parent who would not have left without warning. Besides her children, her closest living relative in 1986 was a stepsister who lived in Maryland. Robert forged Rita's name on 2 bank withdrawal slips and stole $17,617, all the money in Rita's bank accounts, on October 7, 1986. He had apparently divorced Rita in 1974, 3 years into their marriage and 12 years before she vanished. He somehow concealed the fact from her, and they continued to live together for years, separating only in 1985. Rita filed for divorce after Robert left her, only to discover, shortly before her disappearance, that she was already divorced. Only days after Rita's family reported her missing, Robert moved into her home with his girlfriend and her 2 daughters. He married her a month later. All of his children and stepchildren were eventually placed in foster care. Robert is the prime suspect in Rita's disappearance. Authorities believe that foul play was involved in her case and have investigated it as a presumed homicide. Robert has never been charged in connection with Rita's disappearance, but he was convicted of bank fraud in 1992. At his sentencing hearing, the prosecution sought the maximum penalty because of Robert's status as a suspect in Rita's disappearance. Later that year, on the eve of his trial, Robert also pleaded guilty to sexually abusing his stepdaughters. He served 20 years in prison and also spent some time in a secure psychiatric hospital for sex offenders. He was released in 2009 and now lives in Brooklyn. Photos of him are posted with this case summary. Investigators believe Rita's remains may have been placed in the Hudson River in New York shortly after she vanished, but she has never been located. The headless body of a female was recovered from the river in 1988, and from spinal X-rays, authorities initially believed it was Rita, but further testing with DNA ruled out that possibility. Rita's case remains unsolved. The authors Ernest Volkman and John Cummings wrote a book about the Fioretti case called Till Murder Do Us Part. It was published in 1994.
Number 3.
Janice was last seen leaving a friend's home in Smithtown, Long Island, New York, at 10:45 p.m. on October 30, 1981. She stopped at her friend's and invited the friend to accompany her. The friend decided not to and Janice left the friend's home on Nesconset Highway alone. She was en route to a local bar at Nesconset Highway and Hauppauge Road, where she planned to meet her brother Jimmy. Although Janice was underage, she had false identification to get into the bar. Janice and Jimmy were going to go to a nightclub in New York City. Janice never arrived to meet him and has not been heard from again. Janice lived with her family in the 200 block of Mount Pleasant Road at the time of her disappearance. She had a naive, trusting nature and often hitchhiked. Her parents and teachers described her as a normal teenager who enjoyed rock concerts, was close to her siblings, and got average grades in her classes at Smithtown High School West, where she was a senior. However, she had both smoked and sold marijuana, and she had been arrested for selling LSD to an undercover police officer on 3 different occasions, twice at school and once at her home. She pleaded guilty to 1 count as part of a plea bargain and faced the possibility of a year in jail, but disappeared 5 days before sentencing. Janice was reportedly frightened at the prospect of going to jail, but her lawyer believed she would get off lightly since she had no prior criminal record. Besides her legal troubles, things were apparently going well for Janice at the time of her disappearance. She had just been hired as a waitress at a local restaurant and was excited about it, and she had a good relationship with her boyfriend. The police assumed she had dropped out of sight to avoid facing the possible jail sentence, and they issued a warrant for her arrest. Her family and her boyfriend, however, never believed she ran away, and they think foul play was involved in her disappearance. Janice left all her belongings behind when she disappeared and had less than $1 in cash on her that night, which is inconsistent with the runaway theory. Her case remains unsolved. There's been no sign of her since 1981.
Number 4.
Holly was last seen at approximately 9:30 p.m. on July 15, 1981, near Richmond Terrace and Park Avenue in the New York City borough of Staten Island. Her mother sent her to the Port Richmond deli 2 blocks away to purchase a bar of Ivory soap, and she was last seen buying it. She never returned home and has never been heard from again. A month after Holly's disappearance, her mother, Holly Cederholm, received a phone call from a man who identified himself as Sal. Sal told Cederholm he was holding the child captive and demanded that Cederholm meet him and perform sex acts on film in exchange for Holly's safe return. Cederholm went with detectives to meet Sal at Penn Station in New York City, but he never showed up. She stated that she never believed Sal really had Holly. By this time, she thought Holly was dead. Holly's parents have criticized the police for allegedly botching their investigation into the child's disappearance. They disregarded many witnesses who said they saw Holly because the witnesses had criminal records. Holly's half-brother is now a New York City police detective. Investigators deny any misconduct in Holly's case. Her family described her as a streetwise little girl who could take care of herself. Andre Rand, a mentally incompetent convicted child sex offender from New York, was charged with first-degree kidnapping in connection with Holly's disappearance in 2001. Photos of him are posted with this case summary. Rand, whose birth name is Frank Ration, is also believed to be connected to the disappearances of Alice Pereira in 1972, Ethel Atwell in 1978, Tyahis Jackson in 1983, and Henry Gafforio in 1984, among other missing persons cases. There is speculation that Rand may have been involved with the 1977 disappearance of Audrey Nierenberg as well. All of the victims vanished from the Staten Island area, with the exception of Nierenberg. Authorities determined that Rand's aunt lived in the same Port Richmond apartment building where Holly's family resided in 1981. Rand was previously convicted in connection with the 1987 New York kidnapping of a 12-year-old girl named Jennifer Schweiger, who had Down syndrome. She was murdered on the grounds of the now-defunct Staten Island Developmental Center, formerly known as the Willowbrook State School, near his campsite. He was not convicted of her murder. The jury could not reach a verdict on that charge. Officials searched the yard of Rand's former Vreeland Street residence in Staten Island in January 2002, but evidence related to Holly's case was not located. Authorities questioned Rand and searched his vehicle shortly after Holly disappeared, but he was not charged in her case until 20 years later. Officers and inmates at the prison where Rand is currently incarcerated testified regarding conversations in which he allegedly bragged about his pedophiliac exploits. He reportedly confessed Holly's murder to an inmate and compared himself to the serial killer Ted Bundy. Cederholm identified Rand's voice as the same voice she heard during the extortion phone call. Witnesses testified that they saw Rand's green Volkswagen circling the area of the store where Holly disappeared in 1981. Some say they even saw Holly in Rand's car. He admitted to playing a hide-and-go-seek game with Holly on the day of her disappearance and to giving her money to buy soap because she was dirty, but says he left her before she disappeared. Rand's attorneys maintain that their client is innocent and that the witnesses who claim to have seen Holly in his car are lying or mistaken. His lawyers attempted to throw suspicion on the child's family. Prior to her disappearance, Holly had been the subject of a custody dispute between her parents and had been taken by both of them at one time or another, but her parents have been ruled out as suspects in her 1981 disappearance. Rand was convicted of kidnapping Holly in October 2004. Rand was never charged with the child's murder due to a lack of evidence. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. He is also serving 25 years to life for the Schweiger kidnapping. The second sentence makes it extremely unlikely that he will ever be freed. Rand maintains his innocence in all crimes suspected of him. Holly has never been found.
Number 5.
Gargano was last seen at approximately 12:30 p.m. on July 10, 1994. He was leaving his family's residence on Ridge Boulevard in the New York City borough of Brooklyn at the time. He planned to go jet skiing. Gargano never returned home and has not been seen again. He was a student at Pace University in 1994. Federal informants stated Gargano was murdered by John Papa, a member of the Colombo crime family. A photo of Papa is posted with this case summary. Authorities believe he had a disagreement with Gargano's cousin, Anthony Tigger Dellavecchia. Dellavecchia supported James Jimmy Frogs Galeon, who was a member of the Lachese crime organization. Papa believed that Dellavecchia was involved in the murder of Papa's best friend. Dellavecchia was reportedly protected by the Lacheses and could not be harmed without permission from the heads of the mafia families. Papa allegedly told others that he intended to avenge his friend's death by murdering Gargano instead. Gargano was involved in a physical confrontation with Lachese associate Michael Mikey Flattop DeRosa at T-Birds, a Brooklyn area bar, in early July 1994. DeRosa was injured by Gargano in the brawl and reportedly told Gargano he planned to kill him as he was escorted outside of the establishment. Papa allegedly believed that he could murder Gargano and the death would be blamed on DeRosa after the fight occurred. Gargano disappeared days after the incident at T-Birds. Another Lachese member was indicted on unrelated charges in 1997, 3 years after Gargano's disappearance. The man told authorities that Papa bragged about murdering Gargano in 1994 and said that his remains would never be located. Papa was convicted of 4 mafia-related murders in 1997 and is currently serving 2 life sentences plus an additional 65 years in an Indiana federal prison. Papa continues to maintain his innocence in Gargano's disappearance. He has never been charged in the case, but he is considered the main suspect. Investigators received a tip that Gargano was buried in the foundation of Sunshine Collision, an auto body repair shop in Coney Island, New York in 2000. A search of the property was conducted in May 2000 but was halted when the building became unstable. No evidence was located. Gargano's family sent a letter to Papa in prison in 2001, pleading with him to reveal the location of Gargano's remains. In 2012, a witness testifying at the trial of Colombo crime boss Thomas "Tommy Shots" Giuly said Gargano had been shot and beaten to death at Sunshine Collision. The witness said his body was ultimately buried at an industrial park near Farmingdale, New York. Authorities had excavated the area but didn't find Gargano's remains. Organized crime figure Big Dino Calabro was charged with Gargano's murder, but he was ultimately acquitted. The Gargano family has received numerous threats throughout the years for continuing to investigate and publicize Gargano's disappearance, but they have not ceased their efforts. Foul play is suspected due to the circumstances involved in his case.
Number 6.
Geron was last seen in Sodas Point, New York on January 28, 1991. She lived with her boyfriend, Curtis Michael Pucci, in the Rondine Trailer Park on Margaretta Road. Has never been heard from again. All her possessions, including her trailer, were left behind and were later sold. She was employed as a cook at a restaurant in 1991. Geron was involved in an abusive relationship with Pucci at the time she went missing. The month before her disappearance, Geron told her family she planned to leave him and move back in with her children, who lived 200 miles away. She was very upset during this conversation and said she was embarrassed and had made a mistake by becoming involved with Pucci. This is the last time she ever spoke to her loved ones. A photo of Pucci is posted with this case summary. He is currently incarcerated on unrelated charges, serving a 15-year sentence for assaulting his roommate with a hammer. Geron's daughter believes he murdered her mother. He has never been charged in connection with her case, however. Geron's life in early 1991 was deeply troubled. Her husband had died suddenly in 1988. She had begun drinking heavily and left 4 of her children in the care of her oldest child, who was then in her teens. She always maintained contact with her children, however. Authorities initially believed she left of her own accord to avoid legal trouble, as she'd been charged with forging checks and driving while intoxicated. She missed court dates after her disappearance, and a warrant was issued for her arrest, and Pucci told investigators she'd gone to Florida to escape the charges. Geron's daughter reported her as a missing person in 2006 after she found out the paper trail for her mother stopped in 1991. Pucci is considered a person of interest in Geron's case. He has refused to cooperate with the investigation. Her case remains unsolved.
Number 7.
Gargano Bradley was last seen after he was discharged from the hospital in Rochester, New York on May 5, 2005. He had checked in on May 4, stayed overnight and we released at 7:30 a.m. He never arrived home and has never been heard from again. Gargano Bradley was driving his grandmother's car at the time of his disappearance. His own car was being repaired. His grandmother's vehicle was found abandoned 2 blocks from his father's home in Rochester. It was in running condition. Gargano Bradley's father stated the family found the car themselves and called the authorities about it, but the police didn't come to tow the car for 3 days. 2 days after Gargano Bradley was last seen, his credit card was used in Miami, Florida to buy fast food and try to rent a car. Gargano Bradley was receiving Social Security payments in 2005, but he never collected any more payments after his disappearance. He lived with his grandparents and was close to his family, and his father described him as a loner with few friends besides his cousin. His case remains unsolved.